Chief Doyle read the arrest off a laminated card at berth 9, and the whole night crew of the Port of Long Beach stopped to watch. Rafael Mendoza, you're being held for the theft of cargo valued at $2 million, Doyle said, loud enough for every crane operator on the graveyard shift to hear. Rafael didn't argue. He stood there in his faded blue coveralls while Doyle patted him down and turned up nothing but a cheap gold watch. And he let them walk him past the coffee cart, past the men he'd worked beside for 4 months, past Victor Salas, the cargo manager, who leaned in the office doorway with his arms folded and the faintest smile on his face. Someone laughed. A forklift driver lifted a phone to film it. Rafael kept his eyes on the wet concrete and counted his own steps, because Rafael knew one thing none of them did. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from right now. And if a man who had no idea who he was talking to has ever blamed you for his own mess, subscribe and stay with me. The holding company that owned this shipping line, every crane and container and paycheck in that yard, was his. He'd been working these docks under a borrowed badge since March, hunting the exact theft they were now hanging on him. In 3 days, in a conference room 2 floors up, Victor Salas was going to find out who signed his checks. The steel cuffs bit into Rafael Mendoza's wrists at 4:17 in the morning, and the whole night crew stopped working to watch. He stood under the sodium lights of berth 9 at the Port of Long Beach in his faded blue coveralls, a 54-year-old dockhand with a salt-pepper mustache and grease on his knuckles, while a security chief named Doyle read him his rights off a laminated card. Behind Doyle stood Victor Salas, the operations manager, arms folded over his gray company polo, gold watch catching the light, and Victor was smiling the small private smile of a man who thinks he has just won. He had no idea that the quiet worker being marched to the squad car owned the ground all 3 of them were standing on. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from tonight, and if you've ever been treated like garbage by someone who didn't know who you really were, stay with me, because the manifest never lies. It just waits to be read. To understand how a man ends up in handcuffs on the loading dock of his own shipping line, you have to go back 11 months, to the office on the 14th floor of the Ocean Crest Tower in downtown Los Angeles, where Rafael sat alone at 9 p.m., with a spreadsheet that would not stop bleeding red. Mendoza Freight Lines moved 42,000 containers a year through the Port of Long Beach. Rafael had built the company out of a single leased truck in 1989, and for 3 decades the numbers had climbed, one honest quarter after another. Then, sometime in the spring, they started to fall. It was not the kind of fall you could blame on fuel prices or a slow market. Rafael knew every line of his own operation the way a mechanic knows the sound of his own engine, and this sound was wrong. Containers were being logged into the yard and then vanishing from the outbound records. Insurance claims were paid out on cargo that had never been damaged. By September, the leak had swallowed close to $9 million, and every internal audit came back clean, signed off, initialed, perfect. That was the part that kept him awake. A clean audit over a $9 million hole meant someone with a login and a title was doing the stealing. He brought in an outside forensic accountant, a woman named Priya Anand, who charged $400 an hour and did not flatter him. She spent 6 weeks in his records and then sat across his desk and said, "Mr. Mendoza, the theft isn't random. It's structured. Whoever is doing this knows exactly which reports you read and which ones you don't. They know your blind spots better than you do." Rafael asked her who had access to all of it. Priya slid a single sheet across the desk. There were 4 names on it, and every one of them was a person Rafael trusted, a person he had promoted, a person he had trained. Rafael read those 4 names twice, then set the sheet face down on the desk. "I can't do this from up here," he said. Priya looked up. "Do what?" He tapped the 14th floor window with one knuckle, the glass that looked down on 40 acres of stacked steel. Every email I send, one of those four sees it before it lands. Every audit I order, they know which auditor, which day, which dock. Priya said the board would never sign off on what she thought he was about to say. Rafael almost laughed. Then I won't ask the board. He stood and walked to the map of the yard pinned by the door, the one that showed every gate and every crane. He needed to see the place at 3 a.m. under the sodium lights where the containers actually moved and nobody performed for the cameras. To do that, the man who owned the shipping line had to stop being that man. I need to be nobody, he said. A face none of them would bother to remember. So Rafael Mendoza did something the men on his own board would have called insane. He created a temporary staffing record under the name Rafael Cruz, listed as a 54-year-old contract dockhand with a clean license and no fixed address. He held the shipping line through a holding company called Del Mar Maritime, so his own name did not appear on the org chart the yard supervisors ever saw. He grew out the beard he usually kept trimmed, traded his suits for coveralls he bought, used at a work supply store on Alameda Street, and reported for the night shift at Berth 9, like any other new guy hoping the overtime would hold. The first week nearly broke his hands. He was 54, and 30 years behind a desk had softened parts of him that the dock did not forgive. He hauled twist locks until his fingers cramped, guided containers off the cranes in the wind coming off the water, and ate cold sandwiches at 2 a.m. on an overturned bucket next to men half his age. Nobody looked twice at him. That was the whole point. A quiet older worker who did his job and kept his mouth shut is close to invisible in a container yard, and invisibility was the only tool Rafael had that his enemy did not know he was holding. The men around him were mostly good. There was a young guy named Tomas who shared his coffee and talked about a daughter starting kindergarten in Wilmington. There was an old crane operator called Big Sal who had worked the port since 1994 and complained about his knees in exactly the way Rafael's knees were starting to complain. Rafael learned their names, their shifts, their debts, the small, honest gravity of their lives. He liked them. It made what he suspected feel worse, because a thief was moving among these tired men and using their labor to hide his own hands. And then, in his third week, Rafael saw the manager for the first time. Victor Salas came down to the yard around midnight, 44 years old, black hair slicked back so tight it looked painted on, a thin goatee and a gray polo with the Mendoza freight logo stitched over the heart. He carried a clipboard he never seemed to write on. His eyes moved constantly, checking corners, checking who was looking, the restless eyes of a man doing arithmetic that never stops. He walked the rows like he owned them, and he called Rafael, "Hey, old-timer," without ever asking his name. Rafael knew Victor from paper. Victor had been hired 3 years earlier as a logistics coordinator and promoted twice, fast, on the recommendation of the very executive whose name sat at the top of Priya's four-name list. Victor's signature appeared on the outbound manifests that were supposed to be perfect. On the 14th floor, he had been a line item. Down here in the coveralls, Rafael could watch the man breathe, and what he saw was a manager who worked the night shift far more often than his salary required, always around 3 a.m., always when the yard was thinnest. The signal came on a Tuesday, or technically a Wednesday, at 8 minutes past 3 in the morning. Rafael was on a break he had stretched on purpose, standing in the black shadow between two stacks in the F block, when he heard the specific electronic chirp of a handheld scanner. He knew that sound. Every container that legitimately moved through the yard got scanned at gate in and gate out, and the scans wrote a permanent line to the manifest with a timestamp and a scanner ID. There should have been no scanning happening in F block at 3 a.m. because nothing was scheduled to move out until the 6 a.m. gate. He edged around the stack and looked. Victor Salas stood alone beside a 40-foot container, scanner in one hand, phone in the other, and he was scanning the same container's barcode over and over, pausing between each one to tap something into the phone. Rafael counted. Victor scanned that single container 11 times in under 2 minutes, and each time he re-entered a code by hand on the phone. Then he moved to the next container and did it again. He was not logging cargo. He was rewriting where cargo said it was going, one manual override at a time, in the one window of the night when no supervisor and no camera operator was watching the live feed. Rafael stayed in the dark until his legs went numb, and he watched Victor work 11 containers that way before the man pocketed the scanner and walked back toward the office trailer, whistling. That was the first night Rafael understood the full shape of it. Somebody upstairs opened the doors, wrote the clean audits, and moved the money. Victor was the hands in the yard, the man who physically peeled containers off the honest record and stitched them onto a false one, so that a box logged as bound for Oakland actually rolled out the gate to a buyer who paid cash and asked no questions. Now, a lesser man in Rafael's boots would have walked into the office trailer that night, said, "I own this company," and fired Victor Salas on the spot. Rafael had built 42,000 containers a year out of one leased truck by being smarter than that. If he burned Victor now, Victor would take the fall alone and swear he acted alone, and the executive on the 14th floor, the real architect, would send flowers to the trial and keep the $9 million. Rafael did not want the hands. He wanted the head, and to get the head he needed the one thing that could not be forged, signed away, or explained. He needed the manifest, and he needed the picture of Victor's own thumb entering the false codes. So the undercover dockhand became something more careful. Rafael had spent the last 2 years quietly upgrading the yard's camera system, a $500,000 contract he had personally approved back when he still thought his problem was pilferage and not treason. He knew the network. He knew that the live feeds from the F and G blocks routed through a switch in the maintenance shed, and he knew the default credentials on that switch had never been changed because the vendor's own technician had complained about it in an email 18 months earlier. On his next break, Rafael let himself into the maintenance shed with a key he was not supposed to have, plugged a small encrypted drive into the switch, and set it to mirror the F and G block feeds to storage only he could open. For the next 9 nights, while Victor Salas played the tired boss making his rounds, Rafael's drive quietly recorded every 3 a.m. session. He got Victor's face under the lights. He got the scanner in his hand and the phone in the other. He got the specific containers, their numbers legible, and he cross-referenced each one later against the outbound manifest from a burner laptop in a motel on Pacific Coast Highway, matching the moment Victor rescanned a box to the exact line where its destination flipped from real to fiction. By the end of the second week, Rafael had 11 separate incidents on video, 40-odd containers, and a paper trail that led straight up the elevator to the 14th floor. He had almost enough. He needed one more thing, and he made the mistake of thinking he had time to wait for it. He did not know that Victor Salas had started to feel watched. It is a strange sense a guilty man gets. Nothing you can name, just a wrongness in the pattern. Victor noticed that the new old-timer, the one they called Cruz, took his breaks in odd corners. He noticed that Cruz was around the F-block on nights when the F-block had no reason to hold him. He noticed the way the man's calm, dark eyes tracked him across the yard without ever quite landing on him, the attention of somebody who was measuring, not gawking. Victor did not know who Rafael was. He knew only that a quiet 54-year-old contract worker was paying too much attention. And to a man stealing $9 million, too much attention is a threat that has to be handled before it grows teeth. So Victor did what men like Victor always do. He decided that if there was going to be a fall guy, it would not be him. And the perfect moment arrived on its own, wrapped in a serial number and worth $2 million. The container was logged as MFLU 7749320, a 40-foot high cube booked by a pharmaceutical distributor carrying a temperature-controlled load of specialty medical equipment insured at $2,100,000. It came into the yard on a Thursday evening and was scheduled to gate out at 6 a.m. Friday for a bonded warehouse in Vernon. Rafael saw it come in. He knew its value because he still read every high-value inbound report from the burner laptop in the motel, and a $2 million box in his own yard while a thief was working nights made the hair on his arms stand up. He resolved to watch that container all night. He watched the wrong hour. Around 1 a.m., Big Sal called in a jammed twist lock over in C Block, and the yard boss sent Cruz, the reliable new guy, to go help clear it, because Cruz never complained. Rafael spent 40 minutes wrestling a seized lock in C Block with Tomas and Big Sal, cursing under his breath, knowing every minute away from the F-line was a minute he could not afford. When he finally jogged back through the rows at 10 to 2, MFLU 7749320 was gone from its slot, not moved to the outbound queue. Gone. The slot was empty, and there was no crane assignment on the board that explained it. Rafael stood in that empty slot and felt his stomach drop because he understood in 1 second what he was looking at. Victor had not rescanned this one to a false destination the slow way. He had physically pulled a $2 million box out of the yard 3 hours before its legal gate out, on a night when the one worker who had been watching him was conveniently pulled away to fix a lock that a guilty man could easily have jammed himself. Rafael went straight to the office trailer to report the empty slot on the record, the way any honest worker would, and that was exactly the move Victor had been waiting for. Because when the pharmaceutical distributor's driver arrived at 6 a.m. to claim MFLU 7749312 and found nothing, the whole port came awake screaming. A $2 million container did not simply evaporate. Doyle, the security chief, was on the scene by 6:30 with 2 of his men and a laptop, pulling the movement log for the missing box, and Victor Salas was right beside him, helpful, grave, his clipboard finally full of notes. Victor had spent the small hours building the story, and now he told it with the calm of a man reading a weather report. "Chief, I don't want to point fingers," Victor said, which is the sentence every man says right before he points a finger. "But you should look at who was in the F block last night off schedule. We had a contract hand, Cruz, poking around that row for the last 3 weeks. I flagged it to myself. Didn't think much of it." He turned the laptop toward Doyle. On the screen was the yard's scan log, and there, at 1:52 a.m., was a scan of MFLU 7749320, tagged to scanner Unit 14, and Unit 14 had been signed out that night to a contract worker named Rafael Cruz. Rafael, standing 10 feet away in his coveralls, felt the ground tilt. He had not scanned that container. He had never touched Scanner 14 that night. But he knew the instant he saw the line exactly how it had been done, because he had watched Victor rewrite the manifest by hand 11 times over 9 nights from the shadows of the F block. Victor had simply entered Rafael's scanner ID and Rafael's worker credentials into the false scan, the same manual override trick, and pointed it back at the one man who had been watching him. The thief had turned the honest record into a weapon and aimed it at the witness. "That's not my scan," Rafael said, keeping his voice flat and low, the voice of a man who has learned that shouting only makes you look guilty. "I was in C Block from 1 to 20 of 2, clearing a jam with Salvador Reyes and Tomas Ortega. Ask them. I never signed out Unit 14. Doyle looked at the log, then at Rafael, then at Victor, and he did the lazy math that security men do when a $2 million loss lands on their shift and a name is already sitting on a screen. "Log says 14. 14's signed to you," Doyle said. You want to explain why a container worth $2 million got scanned to your unit at 2 in the morning and then walked out the gate. He was already reaching for his radio. Rafael watched Victor's face over Doyle's shoulder, and for 1/2 second, Victor let the mask slip and smiled at him. A small, cold, private smile that said, "I saw you first." "I own the evidence you need," Rafael almost said. He had it. He had 9 nights of Victor Salas on an encrypted drive in a motel safe on Pacific Coast Highway, 11 time-stamped sessions, 40 containers, the whole architecture of the theft with Victor's own thumb on the phone. One sentence and a phone call to Priya Anand would have ended it right there in the trailer at 6:40 in the morning. But Rafael Mendoza had spent 11 months learning that if he moved too soon, Victor would burn alone and the man on the 14th floor would walk free with $9 million and a lawyer. If Rafael revealed himself now in a panic to save his own wrists, the head of the snake would go into a hole and never come out. So he made a choice that would have looked insane to any man who did not understand the game. He decided to let them cuff him. He decided to let Victor believe he had won. A man who thinks he has won gets sloppy. A man who thinks he has buried the only witness stops covering his tracks and starts spending the money. And every dollar Victor Salas moved from this morning forward would be one more line on a manifest that Rafael already controlled. Rafael looked at the drive he could not mention, thought of the motel safe, thought of Priya's 4 names, and let his hands fall open at his sides. "Turn around," Doyle said. "Hands behind your back." Rafael turned around. The cuffs went on cold and tight over the grease on his knuckles, and the ratchet clicked 6 times, and somewhere behind him a couple of the younger hands who did not know him laughed the nervous laugh men laugh when someone else is the one getting arrested. Tomas did not laugh. Rafael caught the young man's face at the edge of the crowd, confused and stricken, mouthing something that might have been Cruz. Big Sal just looked at his boots, and Victor Salas stood by the trailer with his clipboard against his chest, watching the old dock worker get frog-marched across the yard he had built from a single truck in 1989, and Victor let himself enjoy it. They walked Rafael the full length of berth 9, past the stacks and the idle cranes and the men in coveralls, out to where a Long Beach PD cruiser sat, with its lights turning slow and red against the containers. The sun was coming up gray over the water. Doyle put a hand on Rafael's head and folded him into the back seat. And through the window, Rafael watched Victor Salas turn away already, back to his rounds, back to his clipboard, a manager whose problem had just been solved for him by a scanner log he had written himself. Rafael Mendoza sat in the back of that cruiser with his wrists behind him and his face perfectly calm, and he did not feel beaten. He felt patient, because somewhere on the 14th floor of the Ocean Crest Tower, a man with Rafael's own signature forging login was about to hear that a contract nobody named Cruz had taken the fall for the missing $2 million box, and that man was going to relax. He was going to think the danger had passed. He was going to make one more move. And when he did, the manifest would be waiting, the way it always waited, quiet and exact and impossible to argue with, holding every number, every name, every 3 a.m. Scan, holding the truth about who had really walked out the gate with $2 million in medical equipment, and who had built this port from nothing while men in gold watches laughed at him. 11 months. That was how long Rafael Mendoza had spent teaching himself to read a manifest better than any man who had ever worked that port. He learned which columns a clerk skipped when he was rushing, which timestamps got backdated on a Friday, which container numbers came up twice in a single week when only one ship had docked. He memorized the gate scan logs the way other men memorized their children's birthdays. By the 3rd month, he could tell you from a single line of numbers whether a load of surgical equipment had gone out clean or gone out crooked. He never wrote any of it down where a camera could see. He kept it behind his eyes, patient, waiting for the one morning someone would finally ask him what he knew. The holding room at the back of Terminal 4 had one window, painted over, and a metal table bolted to the floor. They left Rafael Mendoza there for 40 minutes with the handcuffs still on, and he sat without complaint, the way he had sat through 10,000 shifts. Outside the door, he could hear Victor Salas laughing with the two port police officers, the clipboard tapping against his thigh, the gold watch catching the fluorescent light every time he gestured at the security cameras. Victor wanted them to see him relaxed. A man who has nothing to hide does not laugh that loud. Rafael watched the second hand on the wall clock. He had watched clocks his whole life, waiting for tides, waiting for cranes, waiting for the exact moment a container had to be moving or the whole schedule collapsed. He was patient in a way that made impatient men nervous. When the younger officer finally opened the door and asked if he wanted water, Rafael looked up and said one thing: "I want my phone call." They uncuffed his right hand and slid the desk phone across the metal. Rafael did not call his wife. He did not call the union. He dialed a number from memory, 10 digits he had not spoken aloud in front of anyone at that terminal in 19 years. And when the voice on the other end answered, he said, "It's me. It's time. Bring the black folder from the safe and bring the drive." He listened for 3 seconds. The conference room upstairs. "Yes, that one. And Elena, call the Coast Guard liaison before you leave the office. Tell him to meet us there." The younger officer frowned. "Who was that?" "My lawyer," Rafael said and hung up. He folded his weathered brown hands on the table, the crow's feet around his dark eyes going still, and for the first time all morning, something moved behind his quiet face. He had endured Victor Salas for 2 years. He had watched the man clip his name badge crooked on purpose, watched him assign the oldest workers the double shifts, watched him call Rafael abuelo in front of the crew and laugh. He had endured because endurance had built everything he owned. That was finished now. Victor pushed the door open without knocking. "Making calls, old man?" He set the clipboard on the table and leaned down, the thin goatee inches from Rafael's face. "You know how this goes. Container KX4471, $2 million of electronics, gone off the yard between your shift and the audit. Your ID badge is the last one that scanned it. There's no lawyer in this city who unscrambles that." "KX4471, Rafael repeated slowly. "Bound for the buyer in Panama City, offloaded at 3:14 in the morning 3 days ago." Victor's restless eyes flickered. He had not told anyone the time. "Everybody knows the time. It's in the audit." "The audit says 5:40, Rafael said. "I read it this morning before you had me pulled off the crane." He watched Victor's jaw tighten under the sharp line of his goatee. "You should read your own paperwork more carefully, Victor. The manifest never lies. It just waits to be read." For half a second, Victor said nothing. Then he straightened, forced the grin back onto his face, and picked up the clipboard. "Save the poetry for the judge." He walked out, and this time he did not laugh. 45 minutes later, they moved Rafael upstairs, still technically under arrest, because the terminal director had received a phone call of his own and did not like the words "controlling interest" and "wrongful detention" landing in the same sentence. The conference room on the 4th floor had a long glass table, 12 leather chairs, and a wall of windows looking out over the stacked containers and the 2 gantry cranes Rafael had operated for 9 years before he ever touched a crane at that port at all. 6 people were already inside. The terminal director, Mr. Okafor, in a Navy suit. 2 regional executives from the shipping company flown in that morning. The 2 port police officers, and Victor Salas, standing near the head of the table like he owned the room, clipboard against his chest. Rafael walked in with the officer at his elbow and took the chair nearest the door, the lowest seat, out of habit. His faded blue coveralls looked wrong against all that leather. One of the executives glanced at him and then at his watch, impatient. Victor smiled at that. "Let's be quick," Victor said. "The evidence is simple. Mendoza had access, Mendoza had the last badge scan, and Mendoza has a grudge because I've written him up 4 times this year for insubordination. 2 million in cargo doesn't vanish by accident. I want him charged before the press gets the story and drags the whole line's name through the mud. Mr. Okafor folded his hands. The line's owner has asked us to wait. The owner, Victor said, and something like contempt curled his lip. Nobody's seen the owner in 20 years, some silent partner hiding behind a holding company in Wilmington. He doesn't run this port. I do. He tapped the clipboard. And I say we charge him. The door opened. A woman in a charcoal suit walked in, mid-40s, carrying a slim black folder and a laptop bag, and she went directly to Rafael and set both in front of him. Everything's here, she said quietly. The footage loaded clean. Then she turned to the room. My name is Elena Reyes. I'm general counsel for Mendoza Maritime Holdings. The name hung in the air. One of the executives sat up. Victor's grin held, but the corner of it twitched. Rafael opened the laptop. His weathered hands moved over the keys slowly, without hurry, the same way they moved over the crane controls when a 40-ton box swung out over open water, and one wrong twitch would drop it. He turned the screen toward the room. Before anyone charges anyone, he said, I'd like everyone to see the yard camera that Victor took offline for maintenance 2 weeks ago. The one over berth 9. Victor's clipboard came down. That camera's dead. It's been logged out of service since the 3rd. It's logged out of service, Rafael agreed. In the terminal system. But 9 years ago I installed a second unit on that pole, wired to a private recorder in the electrical shed, because berth 9 is where cargo goes missing at every port in the world, and I wanted my own eyes on it. He pressed play. It's been recording the whole time. Nobody logged it out because nobody knew it was there except me. The footage filled the screen. Timestamp 3 nights ago, 3:11 in the morning. Grainy gray, but clear enough. A yard tractor rolled into frame, hauling a 40-foot container, KX 44471, stenciled on the side in white. It stopped beside a flatbed truck that did not belong to the port fleet. No company markings, plates smeared with mud. A man climbed down from the tractor cab, slicked back hair, gray polo, a watch that threw a single glint of light when he raised his arm to wave the crane operator forward. There was no mistaking the walk. There was no mistaking the goatee when he turned to check the yard behind him. The room went silent. The kind of silence Rafael had heard only twice before in his life, both times right before something broke. That's doctored, Victor said, and his voice had climbed half an octave. That's edited. He runs the whole IT side. He could put anyone's face on that. I don't run the IT side, Rafael said. I run cranes. Elena, the metadata. Elena set a printed sheet on the glass table and slid it toward Mr. Okafor. The file's original timestamp, unaltered, verified this morning by an outside forensic firm in Long Beach. The camera's serial number, registered to Mendoza Maritime in 2006. No edit history. It's admissible. Mr. Okafor read it, then looked up at Victor, and his face had changed. But Rafael was not finished. He turned back to the laptop and opened the black folder Elena had brought. Inside were paper copies, thick, tabbed with yellow flags. The camera shows who moved the box, he said. The paper shows why nobody caught it. Victor, you signed off on the audit that said KX 4471 left the yard at 5:40 in the morning through Gate 2, legally, on carrier Delgado Freight. I pulled the Gate 2 log. No truck cleared that gate at 5:40. The last vehicle before 6 a.m. cleared at 4:52, and it was a fuel tanker. He laid a page on the table. There is no Delgado Freight. I checked the state registry this morning. The carrier you invented doesn't exist. Victor's restless eyes went to the door, then to the 2 officers, then back to the table. This is insane. He's had 2 years to build a frame around me because I hold him accountable. He's the one with access to every system in this port. I have access to one system, Rafael said. The cranes. And the private recorder in the shed. Everything else I had to ask Elena to pull with a subpoena, which is why it took her 3 days and not 3 minutes. He slid the next page across. This is a wire transfer. $40,000 moved on the 2nd of this month from an account in the Caymans to an account at a credit union in San Pedro. The receiving account is registered to your brother-in-law, Marco Salas. The sending account traces to a shell company called Azul Logistics, incorporated in February, whose only listed director is a mail drop in Panama City, the same city KX4471 was supposed to ship to, and the container that's now sitting, we believe, on a leased barge 2 miles offshore, waiting for a buyer who already paid. One of the executives stood up. Is this true? Can we confirm the barge? The Coast Guard liaison is confirming it right now, Elena said. Rafael gave them the coordinates from the barge's AIS transponder 40 minutes ago. It's holding position off Point Fermin. It hasn't moved since Tuesday. Victor set the clipboard down on the glass very carefully, the way a man sets something down when his hands have started to shake, and he does not want the room to see it. You're going to take the word of a crane operator over a terminal superintendent? He's 54 years old and he lives in a 2-bedroom in Wilmington. I've run this facility for 2 years. Where would a man like him even get lawyers, forensic firms, subpoenas? He gave a laugh that came out thin. This is theater. He's nobody. Rafael stood then. It was a small movement, unhurried, but every eye in the room followed it. He reached into the black folder and took out one more document, a single page with a raised seal in the corner, and he did not slide this one. He set it down flat in front of Victor Salas, so the man had to look at it. That's the deed, Rafael said. Certificate of ownership. Mendoza Maritime Holdings, the parent company of this line, of this terminal, of the 2 cranes outside that window, and of the electrical shed you never bothered to walk into. Registered in Wilmington, Delaware, in 2004. He let Victor read the name at the bottom, printed in black, the same name that was stitched crooked on the badge clipped to Rafael's coveralls. I started on the docks in 1989, loading fruit boxes by hand for $4 an hour. I bought my first tug in 1997. I bought this line in 2004, and I never told anyone, because a man learns more about the people who work for him when they don't know he signs their checks. You called me abuelo in front of the crew for 2 years, Victor. You gave the double shifts to the men closest to retirement. You wrote up Ernesto for dropping a clipboard, and the whole time you were working for me. The clipboard slid off the edge of the table and hit the carpet. Victor did not pick it up. I'm the owner nobody's seen in 20 years, Rafael said. I've been standing in the yard the entire time. You just never looked at the man cleaning the marble. Mr. Okafor turned to the 2 port police officers. Uncuff, Mr. Mendoza. The younger officer was already moving, the key out, and the steel came off Rafael's wrist, and he rubbed the mark it had left without comment. Then the same officer turned toward Victor, and his tone changed entirely. Mr. Salas, I'm going to need you to stay right there. Victor took a step back towards the windows. You don't have anything. Footage can be faked. Wires can be misread. There's no proof I ever touched that container. There's a barge 2 miles out with your name-invented carrier's cargo on it, Rafael said. There's a wire to your wife's brother. There's a shell company you registered in February with your own attorney, whose signature, Elena tells me, is on the incorporation papers. And there's 40 seconds of you climbing out of that tractor with your watch on your wrist, the one you're wearing right now. He nodded at the gold band. You'll want to call your own lawyer, not mine. The confrontation did not end in shouting. Rafael had seen enough shouting in 54 years to know it changes nothing. It ended with Victor Sala sitting down slowly in one of the leather chairs, the restless energy drained out of him all at once, and the older officer reading him his rights in a flat voice while the younger one radioed for a second unit. Victor had loaded that container himself at 3:11 in the morning because he trusted no one else to move $2 million off a yard without leaving prints. His own caution convicted him. He had built the whole scheme to point at Rafael, and every arrow he'd carved ended up aimed at his own chest. The Coast Guard called Mr. Okafor's cell at 11:40. The barge off Point Furman had one 40-foot container aboard, KX 4471, seals intact, waiting for a buyer who would now be arrested at the exchange point the following night. The two regional executives who had flown in that morning ready to sign a criminal complaint against a dock worker spent the next hour apologizing to the man who signed their parent company's dividends. Rafael accepted the apologies without warmth and without cruelty. He had no use for either. They took Victor down the service elevator in cuffs, so the crew on.